A millionaire's son suddenly died of illness, leaving everyone in grief. During the funeral, the boy's sister pointed to the coffin and said, "Mum, give him the elixir," leaving everyone stunned. The hum of indistinct chatter filled the grand ballroom, a low symphony of business deals in the making. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over polished mahogany floors, while the scent of aged wine and expensive cologne lingered in the air. Laughter rose in pockets, the kind that felt rehearsed, punctuated by the occasional clinking of glasses. Andrew Donovan stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, a half-filled whiskey tumbler in hand, his reflection blending into the city skyline. The view stretched endlessly, skyscrapers blinking against the night, people moving like ants below, their lives distant and untouchable. He envied them. They weren't here, trapped in a cycle of small talk and strategic handshakes. His presence at this conference was obligatory, a requirement rather than a choice. Since Rachel's passing, every gathering felt like a charade, smiling, nodding, pretending to care. Work had become his solace, a means to silence the echoes of an empty home. But even that was wearing thin. The weight of absence pressed against his chest, a silent reminder of what once was. Standing alone at a business event? That either means you're important or you're trying to escape, a voice chimed from beside him. Andrew turned, startled slightly. A woman, poised but unassuming, stood at a comfortable distance. She held a glass of red wine, her fingers tracing the rim absent-mindedly. Her presence was effortless, as though she belonged yet was observed from the fringes. "Maybe a little of both," he admitted, shifting his stance. She smiled, not the polite kind, but one that suggested she understood something deeper. "Grace Kensington," she offered, extending her hand. He hesitated briefly before shaking it. "Andrew Donovan." "I know," she said lightly, tilting her head. "Your name tends to come up in circles like these." Andrew exhaled, half a chuckle, half exhaustion. "I hope they're saying good things." Grace shrugged. "Mostly, but reputations are tricky, aren't they? People think they know you because they've read your accomplishments." There was something disarming about her. No calculated flattery, no immediate pitch, just conversation. He found himself studying her in return. She looked composed, the kind of woman who had learned to carry grace through whatever storms life had thrown her way. "You seem familiar," he said, searching his memory. "I used to work in corporate finance," she said, taking a sip of her wine. "Left a few years ago when, well, life happened." He didn't push for details, but the pause told him everything. Loss, change, reinvention. He nodded. "Life has a way of forcing transitions." "Yes," she agreed. "And yet, here we are, still circling these same rooms, shaking the same hands." Her words struck a chord. He hadn't realized how much he had been drifting, moving from one obligation to the next, never quite existing in any of them. Grace leaned against the railing, watching the crowd. "You don't seem like the type who enjoys these events." Andrew smirked. "I used to, but these days it's just noise." She nodded, setting her glass down on the table beside her. "I lost my husband 4 years ago," she said, voice steady, but carrying the weight of a story unspoken. The admission landed between them, neither heavy nor desperate, just a simple truth. Andrew tightened his grip around his tumbler. "My wife passed 2 years ago." For a moment, they didn't speak. No empty condolences, no rehearsed sympathy, just the quiet understanding that only those who have grieved deeply can share. Grace glanced at him. "Do you have children?" The question made his chest tighten. "2, Lucas and Layla." She smiled softly. "That must be a lot." "It is." He exhaled slowly. "And yet, I don't think I've been enough for them." Work became an excuse. Her gaze didn't waver. "We tell ourselves it's for them, don't we? That if we stay busy enough, keep everything running, it makes up for the distance." He looked at her then, really looked. She wasn't just making conversation. She understood. "I have a son," she continued, her voice quieter now. "Mark. He's a little different from other kids. Sensitive, shy. I think losing his father made it worse." Andrew nodded, the image of Lucas flashing through his mind, the way his son had started retreating into himself, the way he no longer asked for help with his homework or insisted on staying up late to watch movies together. "They need more than what we've been giving," Grace said, almost as if reading his thoughts. Andrew swallowed. "I don't even know where to start." Grace smiled, something knowing in her expression. "Maybe it starts with not being alone in it." A waiter passed by, refilling wine glasses, offering hors d'oeuvres neither of them reached for. The room around them continued as before, deals being made, laughter exchanged, people talking in circles. But for the first time in a long time, Andrew felt present. The city blurred past the rain-speckled windows of the taxi, neon lights bleeding into the night like watercolors left out in the storm. Inside the cab, Andrew sat in silence, his fingers tapping absently against his knee. His flight had landed an hour ago, yet he felt no rush to return to the empty house waiting for him. Meetings, presentations, networking, it had all passed in a haze, each encounter blending into the next. These business trips had once held purpose, but now they felt like placeholders, moments stitched together only to keep him from thinking too deeply about the spaces in between. His phone buzzed. "Grace. Flight home or drowning yourself in work again?" A small smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. She had a way of knowing things without him saying them. "Andrew. In a cab. Didn't feel like heading straight home." A pause, then another buzz. "Grace. Coffee. I know a place. No business talk, I promise." He hesitated, then sighed. Maybe talking to someone who understood wouldn't be the worst thing. "Andrew, send me the address." The cafe was small, the kind of place tucked away on a quiet street, where the smell of espresso lingered in the air long after the last cup had been served. A warm glow flickered from vintage lamps, casting soft halos onto wooden tables scratched by years of conversations. Grace was already there, stirring a spoon absent-mindedly through her cappuccino. She looked up as he slid into the seat across from her, offering a smile, not the forced, polished kind he was used to, but something quieter, unhurried. "Rough trip?" she asked. "Same as always." He leaned back, exhaling. "Deals, dinners, more deals." She tilted her head slightly, and nothing that felt real. The corner of his mouth twitched. "You have a habit of asking the right questions." Grace shrugged, taking a sip of her coffee. "I think we're just similar in that way. You don't really belong in those rooms, do you?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. "I used to," he admitted finally. "Before Rachel, before everything." Grace didn't flinch at the name. She didn't rush to fill the silence or offer empty words of comfort. She simply nodded, waiting. Andrew ran a hand over his jaw. "I think I got so used to moving forward that I forgot what stopping even looks like. I go home, I check in on the kids, but I don't really exist there. I don't think they see me as a father anymore. Just some guy who provides and passes through." Her expression softened. "Lucas and Layla?" "Yeah." He traced a pattern on the tabletop, his voice quieter now. "Lucas used to wait up for me, used to ask me to sit with him before bed. Layla would curl up next to me on the couch just to be close. But now, it's different. They don't expect me anymore." Grace was silent for a beat, then set her cup down carefully. "Mark was the same after his father died. I think he was afraid to attach himself to me too much, like he was preparing for me to disappear too." Andrew glanced up. "How did you fix it?" She exhaled slowly. "I didn't. Not all at once, anyway. I just started showing up in ways he didn't expect. Not the big things, just little moments that reminded him I wasn't going anywhere. Sitting with him when he didn't ask, making his favorite dinner for no reason, letting him talk about things that made no sense to me just because he wanted to be heard. Andrew studied her, letting the words settle. And it worked. Not right away. A small, knowing smile. But he started believing me. Something in him shifted then, a thought forming before he even realized it. He had spent so much time convincing himself that his absence was justified, that as long as his children had everything they needed, they would be fine. But that wasn't what they needed, was it? They needed to believe he was staying. Grace leaned forward slightly. They don't need you to be perfect, Andrew. They just need you to show up. His grip on his coffee tightened, a strange mix of guilt and clarity settling in his chest. "You're good at this," he murmured. She laughed, shaking her head. "I have no idea what I'm doing half the time, but I know what it feels like to watch your child pull away and not know how to bring them back. And I know it's terrifying." He nodded slowly, then glanced at her. "You should meet them." Grace blinked, caught off guard. "Your kids?" "Yeah." The idea had come out of nowhere, but now that it was spoken aloud, it made sense. "You understand this better than anyone. Maybe having someone like you around would help." She hesitated, not out of reluctance, but something softer. Caution, maybe. "Are you sure?" Andrew let out a slow breath. "I think I need to start being sure about something." Grace held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay." And just like that, a new possibility unfolded, one that neither of them had planned for, but somehow neither of them resisted. The soft hum of jazz played through the house, blending with the faint clatter of plates and the occasional sound of the wind brushing against the windows. The air carried the warmth of roasted chicken and garlic, a scent that used to mean something in this house. A family gathered, conversation flowing between bites, Rachel's laughter spilling from the kitchen. Now, it was just another dinner. Andrew adjusted his shirt cuff as he glanced toward the dining room, where Layla sat at the table, absently swinging her legs beneath the chair. She was watching the entryway, her wide eyes filled with the quiet curiosity of a child who understood more than she let on. Across from her, Lucas focused on his phone, shoulders hunched slightly, pretending not to care. The doorbell rang. Andrew exhaled, straightening his posture before making his way to the door. When he pulled it open, Grace stood there, Mark slightly behind her, his small frame partially obscured by her presence. "Right on time," Andrew said, stepping aside. Grace smiled. "We try." Mark hesitated for a second before following his mother inside, his fingers curling into the hem of his sweater. His gaze darted around the house, big, pristine, a little too perfect. Layla met his eyes from across the room and gave him a tiny, uncertain wave. Mark looked down. "Come in," Andrew said, motioning toward the dining table. "Dinner's ready." Grace placed a gentle hand on Mark's back, guiding him forward, but he tensed. Just a flicker of hesitation. Quick, almost imperceptible. Almost. Layla noticed. The meal began with the usual pleasantries, the kind of conversation that filled space rather than meaningfully occupied it. Grace took on the role of easy warmth, her voice smooth as she commented on how lovely the house was, how wonderful it was to finally meet Lucas and Layla. Layla studied her between bites, head slightly tilted, as if trying to solve a puzzle no one else had noticed. Grace was nice. Too nice, maybe. She laughed at the right times and nodded at all the right moments. She knew exactly how to make her presence feel effortless, but there was something about it that made Layla pause. She glanced at Mark, who sat stiffly, his hands folded in his lap. He wasn't eating much, barely speaking, except when prompted. Layla caught the way he flinched, just barely, whenever Grace reached for the serving spoon near him, like he was waiting for something. Lucas, on the other hand, was polite but distant, answering questions when asked but not offering much else. He wasn't rude, just reserved, observing. "So, Lucas," Grace said at one point, her voice carrying the ease of someone used to navigating these situations. "Your dad tells me you're into baseball." Lucas glanced up. "Yeah. Do you play?" "Used to," he said, returning his focus to his plate. "Not so much anymore." "Why not?" A pause. The air shifted. Lucas set his fork down. "Guess I just stopped caring about it." Grace nodded slowly, like she understood, like she knew the weight beneath those words. It's hard, isn't it? When something you love just doesn't feel the same anymore. Lucas didn't respond, but something flickered across his face before he looked away. Andrew noticed. He also noticed the way Grace navigated the conversation, how she never pushed too hard, never made her presence feel intrusive. She was good at this, reading people, knowing what they needed to hear, and how much space to give. It made him feel lighter somehow. "You know," Grace continued, her tone gentle but not pitying, "Mark used to love drawing. He'd spend hours filling up sketchbooks. Then one day he just stopped." Mark stiffened slightly, eyes fixed on his plate. Grace reached out, smoothing a hand over his back. "But we figured it out, didn't we?" Mark nodded mechanically. "Yeah." Something about the way he said it sat wrong in Layla's chest. By the time dinner was winding down, Andrew felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of ease, of normalcy. Grace fit into the space around them seamlessly, not forcing herself in, just letting herself settle naturally. Lucas hadn't warmed up to her, not completely, but he also hadn't shut down entirely. That was a start. Layla, however, kept watching, and Mark kept his head down. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and coffee, the soft morning light stretching across the marble countertops. A faint drizzle tapped against the window, casting a rhythmic hush over the house. The warmth of home should have felt comforting, but to Lucas, it only made the silence heavier. He sat at the breakfast bar, stirring his cereal absent-mindedly, listening to the distant sound of Layla's laughter from the living room. Grace had been here for months now, seamlessly integrating into their routines. She made breakfast, packed lunches, reminded them to wear their jackets before school. It wasn't bad. It wasn't good either. Across the room, Andrew slipped on his suit jacket, glancing at the clock. He had another early meeting, another long day ahead. "Leaving already?" Grace asked, placing a steaming cup of coffee in front of him. Andrew took a sip, nodding. "Early presentation. I should be back late afternoon." He turned to Lucas, hesitating before resting a hand on his shoulder. "You good?" Lucas nodded, not looking up. Andrew sighed, squeezing his shoulder briefly before stepping away. "Layla," he called out, "be good for Grace, okay?" "Okay, Dad," she chirped from the living room. Lucas felt the absence of his father the moment the door clicked shut. Mornings turned into weeks, weeks into months. Andrew, reassured that Grace had everything under control, buried himself deeper in work. At first, it had been a necessity, providing, keeping things afloat, but now it was something else. It was easy, easier than navigating grief, easier than figuring out how to connect with Lucas and Layla again. And Grace? She handled everything. She made sure Layla's hair was neatly braided before school. She reminded Lucas about his assignments. She met with his teachers when he started slipping in class. She even reorganized the kitchen, making small changes that somehow made the house feel different. Andrew didn't notice the shift, but Layla did. She noticed how conversations at dinner always seemed to revolve around Grace. How whenever Mark hesitated to answer a question, Grace would do it for him. How Lucas had become even quieter, retreating into his room after school, instead of lingering in the kitchen like he used to. Most of all, she noticed Mark. He hardly spoke unless she spoke to him first. He barely met his mother's eyes, and when he did, it was like he was waiting for something, bracing himself. One afternoon, as the rain drummed steadily against the windows, Layla sat cross-legged on the living room floor, flipping through a book she wasn't really reading. Mark sat beside her, doodling absent-mindedly on a scrap of paper. "Why don't you talk much?" she asked, tilting her head. Mark tensed. "I do." "Not really." He hesitated, shading the edge of his drawing. "I just don't have much to say." Layla watched him for a moment, then glanced toward the kitchen, where Grace stood with Lucas, talking about school. Her voice was warm, patient. Lucas nodded, responding politely, but his shoulders looked stiff. Layla leaned in, dropping her voice. "Are you scared of her?" Mark's pencil froze mid-stroke. He didn't look at her. Layla's stomach twisted. "She's nice," Mark mumbled, but it sounded rehearsed. Layla opened her mouth to ask something else, but just then, Grace turned toward them, her voice breaking through the low murmur of rain. "Layla, sweetheart, could you help me set the table?" Layla hesitated, glancing back at Mark, who had quickly gone back to drawing, his head ducked low. "Coming," she called out, pushing herself up. At dinner, Grace sat at the head of the table, effortlessly guiding the conversation. "Lucas, I was talking to your math teacher today," she said casually. "She mentioned you've been struggling a bit with algebra." Lucas barely looked up from his plate. "I'm fine." "It's okay to need a little help," she continued. "I can go over your homework with you." Lucas's grip on his fork tightened. "I said I'm fine." Andrew glanced up, frowning. "Lucas, she's just offering." Lucas stabbed at his food. "I don't need her help." Silence settled over the table, thick and heavy. Grace's expression didn't shift. If anything, it softened. "Okay," she said gently. "Whenever you're ready." Layla wasn't sure if it was the response itself or the way she said it, but something about it made Lucas shut down completely. He barely spoke for the rest of the meal. Andrew, distracted, missed it, but Layla didn't. Later that night, as Andrew was heading upstairs, he noticed Layla lingering by the staircase. "Not sleepy?" he asked, ruffling her hair. She hesitated. "Dad?" She glanced toward the dimly lit hallway leading to Lucas's room, then back at him. "Do you think Grace is too much sometimes?" Andrew frowned. "What do you mean?" Layla shifted on her feet. "She just changes things, and I don't think Lucas likes it." Andrew exhaled, crouching down to her level. "Change isn't always easy, sweetheart, but Grace is just trying to help." Layla's brows furrowed. "But what if it's too much?" Andrew hesitated, glancing toward the closed doors of his children's rooms. He wanted to say he understood, but the truth was, he hadn't really been paying attention. "She cares about you," he said instead, smoothing her hair. "That's a good thing." Layla didn't look convinced. Neither did he. The autumn air carried a crisp chill, slipping through the cracks of the house, despite the steady hum of the heater. The first fallen leaves clung damply to the pavement outside, scattered in restless patterns by the wind. Inside, the warmth of morning should have been comforting, but an unease had settled into the walls. Lucas sat at the breakfast table, his head resting on his hand, spoon turning sluggish circles in his cereal. He hadn't touched his toast. Layla, sitting across from him, noticed the paleness of his face, the way his shoulders slumped slightly, like the weight of his body had become too much. "Lucas, honey, eat a little more before school," Grace said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Lucas gave a small nod, but didn't move. "Maybe he's just tired," Andrew offered, sipping his coffee as he glanced at his watch. "Long week, right, bud?" Lucas nodded again, eyes heavy-lidded. "Yeah, just tired." Layla watched as Grace picked up a glass from the counter, pouring a small amount of a dark liquid into it before adding water. She stirred it smoothly, her movements practiced. "Here, sweetheart," she said, placing the cup in front of Lucas. "This should help." Lucas took the glass, drinking it without question. Layla frowned. "What's in it?" she asked, staring at the dark tint of the liquid. Grace smiled, her expression effortless. "Just some herbal drops. Good for energy. Natural remedies are always best, don't you think?" Layla didn't respond. She watched as Lucas set the glass down and rubbed his temples, as if even the effort of swallowing had drained him. Over the next few days, Lucas's exhaustion deepened. He came home from school and collapsed onto the couch, skipping his usual routines, his energy fading in increments. He barely touched his food, sometimes pushing it around his plate before excusing himself early. At dinner one night, he barely made it through half the meal, before dropping his fork with a soft clatter. "I think I'm going to lie down," he murmured, standing too fast. His body wavered slightly before he steadied himself. Andrew frowned. "Lucas, are you all right?" Lucas nodded, but didn't look up. "Yeah, just a headache." Grace was already reaching for his plate. "I'll bring you something light later," she said warmly. Andrew exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "Maybe we should take him to a doctor." Grace smiled gently. "I spoke to his teacher today. Apparently there's a nasty flu going around. I wouldn't worry too much. Let's see how he feels in a few days." Andrew nodded, relieved at her calm certainty. "You're probably right." Layla wasn't so sure. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the house, Layla wandered into the kitchen. The air smelled faintly of chamomile and something bitter. She peered around the corner and saw Grace standing at the counter, measuring out drops of the same dark liquid into Lucas's glass. The way she did it, careful, precise, made Layla's stomach twist. Mark sat at the small kitchen table, sketching half-heartedly on a loose sheet of paper. He hadn't noticed her yet. Layla stepped closer. "Hey." Mark flinched. Not the kind of startled jump people make when they don't expect someone, but something deeper, more instinctive. He looked up quickly, forcing a small smile. "Hi," he said, setting his pencil down. Layla sat across from him, lowering her voice. "Do you know what's in that?" Mark's fingers twitched slightly, but he didn't look toward the counter. "It's just medicine," he said too quickly. Layla narrowed her eyes. "You don't sound like you believe that." Mark swallowed hard, gripping his pencil like it might anchor him. He hesitated, then said softly, "She says it helps." Layla's heart pounded. "But does it?" Mark glanced toward Grace, who was humming softly as she stirred the mixture. His shoulders curled inward slightly. "She says it does." Something about the way he said it made Layla's stomach knot. She turned back toward Grace just as she finished stirring and carried the glass toward the stairs. "I'll bring this up to Lucas," she said over her shoulder, her voice light. "I don't want him getting weaker." Layla watched her disappear down the hallway, a sinking feeling pressing down on her chest. Later that night, Layla lay awake, listening. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of wood settling in the walls. Then she heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. She slipped out of bed, padding to the doorway and peeking into the dimly lit hallway. Mark was standing just outside his bedroom, his small frame barely visible in the darkness. "Mark," Layla whispered. He hesitated before stepping toward her. His voice was barely audible. "Something's wrong with Lucas." Layla's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Mark glanced down the hall toward Lucas's closed door. "He's getting worse." Layla bit her lip, then took a breath. "Tomorrow I'm going to watch. I want to see exactly what she's giving him." Mark didn't say anything, but he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Layla closed her door, heart hammering. For the first time in a long time, she felt afraid. The morning light filtered through the curtains in fractured slants, casting long shadows over the wooden floors. The house was quiet, but not peaceful, too still, as if waiting for something. Layla sat curled on the couch, her book open but unread. Across the room, Mark fidgeted with the frayed hem of his sweater, his sketchbook untouched beside him. Neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy, thick with unspoken thoughts. Upstairs, the muffled sound of coughing broke the hush. Layla flinched. Lucas hadn't been out of bed in 2 days. She turned her gaze toward the staircase just as Grace descended, her expression composed, carrying the familiar glass of dark liquid. She moved easily through the kitchen, her hands methodical as she rinsed the cup, as if this were just another part of her daily routine. Layla's hands curled into fists. "Layla," Grace's voice was smooth and practiced. "Could you bring a fresh towel up to Lucas?" He might feel better with a cool compress. Layla hesitated. I'll do it," Mark cut in quickly, his voice small but firm. Grace's smile barely flickered. "That's sweet, Mark, but Layla's already here." Layla swallowed, nodding stiffly before slipping past her. As she climbed the stairs, her heart pounded against her ribs. She pushed Lucas's door open cautiously. The room was dim, the air heavy with the stale scent of sweat and sickness. Lucas lay beneath tangled sheets, his skin pale against the pillow. His breath was shallow and uneven. "Lucas," she whispered. His eyelids fluttered. He turned his head slightly, but there was a delay, as if even that movement required effort. "Hey," he murmured, voice hoarse. Layla stepped closer, her fingers tightening around the towel in her hands. "Have you been drinking that stuff Grace gives you?" Lucas exhaled a faint chuckle. "She says it'll help." "Does it?" His brow furrowed slightly, like he was trying to think through the fog in his head. "I don't know. I just feel tired." Layla sat beside him, her pulse hammering. "Do you feel sick, like the flu?" Lucas hesitated. "Number, it's not like that. It's more like I don't have the energy for anything, like I'm moving in slow motion." Layla's stomach twisted. She reached for the half-full glass on his nightstand. The water inside was tinted faintly amber, the remnants of whatever Grace had given him still swirling near the bottom. She lifted it to her nose, bitter, sharp. Her chest tightened. "Layla?" Lucas's voice was weaker now. She set the glass down carefully, pressing the towel to his forehead, though her hands were trembling. "It's okay," she said, though she wasn't sure if she believed it. She turned toward the door. She had to tell Dad. The study door was half open when Layla hesitated outside, peering in. Andrew sat at his desk, rubbing a hand over his face. He looked exhausted, dark circles shadowing his eyes. His laptop was open, but his focus was elsewhere. Layla took a deep breath and stepped in. "Dad?" He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "Layla, what's wrong?" She hesitated. "It's about Lucas." Andrew sat up straighter. "Is he worse?" Layla nodded, stepping closer. "It's that stuff Grace gives him. I think—" She swallowed. "I think it's making him sick." Andrew sighed, rubbing his temples. "Layla, Grace is trying to help. She wouldn't do anything to hurt him." "But Dad—" "She spoke with the doctor already," he interrupted. "They think it's just a viral thing. Some kids at school have been dealing with fatigue too." Layla's stomach sank. "You don't understand. I saw her put something in his water, and when I smelled it, it was—" "Layla." Andrew's voice was gentle, but there was finality in it. "I know you're worried. I am too. But Grace has been here every day taking care of him while I—" He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I haven't been as present as I should be. I trust her." Layla stared at him, frustration and fear tangling in her chest. He wasn't listening. Andrew reached for her hand, squeezing it lightly. "I know it's hard adjusting, sweetheart, but Grace is family now. She loves you and Lucas." Layla swallowed back the lump in her throat, nodding stiffly. But in her heart, she knew something was wrong. She just had to prove it. The house was too quiet. Not the kind of silence that brought peace, but the kind that lingered, thick and oppressive. The kind that pressed against Layla's chest as she sat up in bed, listening. A sound. Faint, ragged. A breath struggling to push through. Her heart pounded as she slipped out from under the covers, padding barefoot down the hall. The light under Lucas's door flickered. Weak, dim, the glow of a bedside lamp barely illuminating the cracks in the wood. She pressed her ear against it. Another ragged inhale. Then, nothing. Leave a comment. Bean, if you are surprised by Lucas's death. The air seemed to freeze. Layla pushed the door open. Lucas lay still beneath the blankets, his chest unmoving. The color had drained from his face, his lips pale, his arms slack against the sheets. The glass of water Grace had given him sat empty on the nightstand. "Lucas?" Layla whispered, her voice trembling. Nothing. Panic flooded her veins. She rushed forward, shaking him. "Lucas, wake up! Lucas!" No response. No breath. A choked sob tore from her throat as she stumbled back, feet unsteady. "Dad! Dad!" The house erupted into chaos. Footsteps pounded up the stairs. Doors flew open. Andrew was the first inside, his expression shifting from confusion to horror as he took in the scene. "Lucas!" He rushed forward, shaking his son. "Lucas, wake up! Wake up!" Nothing. Grace was behind him, her hand pressed to her mouth. "Oh, Andrew!" Her voice was soft, controlled, sorrow woven through every syllable. Mark appeared at the doorway, small and frozen, his eyes wide with terror. Layla clutched at Andrew's sleeve, sobbing. He wasn't this bad before, Dad. I swear. Something's wrong." Andrew barely seemed to hear her. He lifted Lucas's limp body, cradling him against his chest. "We need to call someone. Get help." His voice cracked, frantic, but Grace was already pulling out her phone. "I'll call the doctor," she murmured. "The one we've been seeing." Layla wanted to scream. Number not her doctor. A real one. Someone who wasn't on her side. But before she could say anything, Grace was already speaking into the phone, her tone calm, measured. Too calm. Mark tugged at Layla's sleeve. His hands were trembling. "Layla." His voice was barely a whisper. "He's not breathing." Layla's knees buckled. The doctor arrived within 20 minutes. Not an ambulance, not paramedics, just one man in a suit, carrying a black medical bag. Layla didn't know his name, but she knew he had been the one Grace called when Lucas first got sick. He checked Lucas's pulse, laid his head against his chest. Then he looked at Andrew, shaking his head. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice filled with forced sympathy. "There was nothing more we could have done." The words crushed the air from the room. Andrew collapsed into the chair beside the bed, his head in his hands. Grace knelt beside him, her hand rubbing slow, soothing circles on his back. "I'm so sorry, Andrew," she whispered. "I know how much you loved him." Layla stood frozen, her body numb. This wasn't real. This wasn't happening. She turned to Mark, gripping his wrist. His face was pale, his eyes glistening with unspoken words. Mark knew something. But before she could speak, Andrew let out a broken sob, and the sound of it sent a fracture through the entire house. Nothing would ever be the same again. The funeral came quickly. Too quickly. The coffin was small, polished wood, unnatural against the sea of black-clad mourners. The service was quiet, restrained. People spoke in hushed voices, casting sympathetic glances at Andrew, at Grace, at Layla, who sat stiff and silent, her hands knotted in her lap. She hadn't cried. Not since that night. Not since Lucas had been stolen from her in the dark. Andrew barely spoke. He sat with his head bowed, his grief so consuming that it left no room for anything else. Grace, as always, was beside him. Her touch was gentle, her words measured. She guided him through the motions, handled the arrangements, made sure everything was perfect. Layla wanted to scream. She wanted to grab her father and shake him and tell him to wake up, to see what was happening. But no one would believe her, because Grace was perfect. After the service, people gathered in small groups, speaking in murmurs, offering condolences. Layla stood beside the casket, staring at the polished wood, at the nameplate that didn't belong there. Lucas Donovan, gone, just like that. A lump rose in her throat. Her hands trembled. She couldn't breathe. Then, without thinking, she turned to Grace. The words left her lips before she could stop them. Why didn't you give him the medicine that makes him better? The air around them seemed to shatter. Silence. Thick. Stifling. Grace's expression didn't falter, but Layla saw it. That flicker. That moment of hesitation. The people standing nearby turned to look. Andrew lifted his head. The medicine, he echoed, his voice hoarse. Layla swallowed hard. The one she always gave him, every day. She said it would help him. A ripple of unease passed through the small crowd. Andrew's brow furrowed. He turned to Grace, his grief-stricken mind latching onto the words like a drowning man grasping for a rope. Grace? Grace let out a soft, breathy laugh, shaking her head. Oh, sweetheart, she murmured, reaching for Layla's shoulder. You're just confused. Lucas was sick. We did everything we could. But Layla took a step back, her voice rising. No, I saw you. I saw you put something in his water, and then he got worse. Grace's fingers twitched. The tension in the air grew unbearable. Andrew's breath came shallow. His grief-clouded mind was struggling, pushing against the walls Grace had so carefully built around him. The air in the house felt heavier, as if the walls had absorbed every whispered doubt, every silent scream Layla had swallowed in the past few weeks. The funeral had ended, but something had shifted. Andrew sat in his study, hands clasped together, staring blankly at the glass of whiskey on his desk. The warmth of the liquor barely registered. His body felt cold, his mind numb. Layla's words wouldn't leave him. Why didn't you give him the medicine that makes him better? She gave him something. I saw it too. He squeezed his eyes shut, willing himself to dismiss it, to chalk it up to grief, to childhood confusion. But then he thought of Lucas. His son, vibrant and full of life, reduced to a shadow before slipping away into nothing. And Grace, so calm, so in control, so sure of every step. His stomach twisted. A soft knock on the door. Andrew looked up. Mark stood there, small and hesitant, clutching something in his hands. Can I come in? Mark asked quietly. Andrew nodded. Mark stepped forward, glancing around as if making sure no one else was there. Then, wordlessly, he placed a small bag on the desk. Andrew frowned. What is this? Mark hesitated, then said, I found it in her room. Andrew's breath caught. The bag was filled with small bottles, their labels unmarked except for faint, handwritten codes. The liquid inside was thick, a deep amber color, the same shade that had been in Lucas's glass. A cold weight settled in Andrew's chest. What? What is this, Mark? His voice was hoarse, trembling. Mark swallowed hard. It's what she gave Lucas. Every day. Andrew stared at the bottles, bile rising in his throat. His fingers shook as he reached for one, unscrewing the cap. A bitter scent curled into the air, sharp and unnatural. His pulse roared in his ears. She told me never to touch them, Mark whispered. Never to ask questions. Andrew stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He felt dizzy, his body disconnected from his mind. He had trusted her. He had let her take over everything. And now, his son was gone. The room blurred as he grabbed his phone, his fingers tightening around it like a lifeline. He dialed the doctor's number, the one Grace had insisted on, the one who had pronounced Lucas dead. The line rang twice before a smooth voice answered. "Doctor, Callahan speaking." Andrew's grip on the phone tightened. "I need to ask you something," he said, his voice sharper than it had been in weeks. "When you examined my son, did you do an autopsy?" A pause. "No," Callahan answered. "Given the nature of his illness and with Grace's insistence, we determined it wasn't necessary." Andrew's blood turned to ice, Grace's insistence. "Doctor," Andrew said, his breath unsteady, "I want my son's body retrieved. I want a full medical examination." Another pause. Then a slow exhale. "Mr. Donovan, I don't think that's necessary. Lucas's condition was—" "I don't care what you think," Andrew snapped. "I want an autopsy." The line went silent. Then Callahan sighed. "You should talk to Grace about this before making any rash decisions." Andrew's stomach twisted. That was all he needed to hear. He hung up. Mark watched him, his small hands gripping the edge of the desk. "What do we do now?" Andrew inhaled sharply, his mind racing. He had been blind, so completely blind, but not anymore. "We get him back," he murmured. And for the first time since Lucas's death, Andrew felt something other than grief. Rage. The moment Andrew stepped into the living room, Grace turned, her face composed, expectant. "Where were you?" she asked softly. Andrew ignored the question. "We need to talk." Something in his tone made her blink. "Of course," she said smoothly, stepping closer. "What's wrong?" Andrew stared at her, at the softness of her expression, the way her lips curved just slightly, not in surprise, not in confusion, in control. He held up the small bottle from the bag Mark had given him. "What is this?" Grace's eyes flickered. "Just a fraction." She recovered too quickly. "Andrew, where did you find that?" "Answer me," she sighed, shaking her head like a disappointed parent. "It's just a supplement," she said. "Natural, herbal. I gave it to Lucas to help with his weakness." Andrew's grip tightened. "Then why did you hide it?" She exhaled slowly. "I didn't hide it." Andrew slammed the bottle onto the table. The sound cracked through the room. "Stop lying to me." His voice was low, controlled, but something burned beneath it. For the first time, Grace's calm faltered. "Andrew," she said, stepping forward, reaching for him. "You're grieving. You're looking for answers where there aren't any." He stepped back. "I ordered an autopsy." Her expression froze. A long silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, she smiled. A small, calculated thing. "You don't trust me," she murmured. Andrew stared at her, his chest rising and falling sharply. "No," he said, "I don't." Grace's lips parted, as if she was about to protest, but no words came. Instead, she inhaled deeply, smoothing her hands down her dress. "I see," she finally said. Andrew turned away. "Pack your things." A flicker of something passed over her face. Not sadness, not hurt, amusement. She tilted her head. "And if I don't?" Andrew's stomach turned. For the first time he saw it, the mask slipping, the real Grace staring at him from beneath perfectly practiced expressions. "I don't think you understand, Andrew," she said quietly. "I'm not the problem here. Your paranoia is—" He clenched his fists. "You took my son from me." She blinked, her lips parting just slightly. Then she laughed, software, almost pitying. "Oh, Andrew," she whispered. "You really don't get it, do you?" His breath stilled. The room felt too small, the walls closing in. And suddenly, Andrew knew. This wasn't over. Not even close. The night stretched long and suffocating, the weight of discovery pressing against Andrew's chest like an iron hand. His mind raced, piecing together fragments of moments he had dismissed before. Grace's unwavering control, her insistence on handling Lucas's care, the subtle way she had steered every decision. And now, Mark's revelation. Andrew sat at his desk, staring at the bag of bottles as if they might rearrange themselves into something less sinister. The truth pulsed inside him, loud and unbearable. Mark sat stiffly in the chair across from him, his hands curled into his lap, his small frame tense. "Tell me everything. I'll protect you. Grace wasn't here," Andrew said, his voice low and rough. Mark's fingers twitched. His gaze flickered toward the door, as if expecting Grace to appear at any second. "She did the same thing before," Mark whispered. "With my dad." Andrew's blood ran cold. Mark swallowed hard, his voice barely audible. "She made him sick, little by little, just like Lucas." Andrew's breath caught in his throat. "How do you know?" "I saw her," Mark said, his voice shaking. "I didn't understand at first. I thought she was helping him, taking care of him, like she said. But then he got worse. He'd sleep all day and stop eating. He was just tired all the time." Andrew felt nausea churn in his stomach. "She told me not to say anything," Mark continued. "She said my dad was sick and that talking about it would only make it worse. And I believed her, because she was my mum." His hands clenched into fists. "But then one day, I saw her put something in his tea. A few weeks later, he died." Andrew exhaled shakily, gripping the edge of the desk. "And no one questioned it?" Mark shook his head. "She said it was a heart condition, that it just happened." He hesitated. "But I heard her on the phone. She talked to a doctor, the same way she did with Lucas. She made sure everything was handled before it could get messy." Andrew's stomach twisted violently. Everything, every detail. It was the same pattern. Mark looked down at his hands. "She told me it was better this way, that we'd be safe, that she was protecting me." His voice wavered. "But I don't think she ever cared about protecting anyone but herself." Andrew pressed his fingers to his temples, trying to steady himself. His son hadn't just died. He had been taken from him, murdered. A surge of rage burned through him, sharp and blinding. "We have to stop her," Mark whispered, "before she does it again." Andrew nodded slowly, his hands tightening into fists. "We will." He reached for his phone, dialing a number with fingers that no longer shook. The exhumation order came swiftly. Andrew stood at the edge of the cemetery, the cold biting through his coat, watching as workers unearthed the casket. The air smelled of damp earth and something heavier, something final. Layla stood beside him, small and silent, her hand curled around his. Neither of them spoke. The coffin was lifted carefully and placed onto a flat surface before it was transported to the hospital for examination. Andrew's mind screamed at him to look away, to stop this, to protect himself from the truth he already knew. But he didn't. He owed Lucas that much. The results came the next evening. The medical examiner's face was unreadable as he handed Andrew the report. "I need you to prepare yourself," he said. Andrew opened the folder with steady hands, and then he saw it. Lucas's toxicology screen. His body had been filled with a slow-acting poison disguised as herbal supplements. The levels had been carefully maintained, just enough to weaken him over time, without setting off immediate alarms. A carefully crafted illusion of illness. But that wasn't the worst part. Andrew's breath hitched as he read the final note. Lucas had still been alive when he was buried. His body showed signs of oxygen deprivation, his nails bruised from where he had clawed at the inside of the coffin. He had woken up, trapped, alone, suffocating. Andrew dropped the report. The room swayed, the walls pressing in. His son had died, thinking no one was coming for him. Layla's small voice broke through the silence. "Dad?" Andrew couldn't speak. His hands clenched into fists, shaking with rage, with guilt, with the weight of his failure. Grace had done this, She had done it so carefully, so deliberately, and he had let her. Number no more. He turned to Layla, his voice steady but cold. "We're going home." The house was dim when Andrew walked through the door. Grace left when Andrew chased her away in anger, but it seems her shadow and Mark still remain here. For the first time, he didn't see the woman he had once trusted. He saw the monster she really was. And this time, wherever she isn't going to get away. The hospital room smelled sterile, a mix of disinfectant and something artificial. Machines beeped in rhythmic intervals, their soft hum filling the space. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic, the kind that clung to skin and fabric, the kind that Andrew had learned to hate. But today, he didn't hate it, because today, Lucas was breathing. Andrew sat in the chair beside the bed, his fingers curled around his son's frail hand. The weight of Lucas's palm in his own was the only thing keeping him anchored to reality. Lucas's eyelids fluttered, his chest rising and falling in slow, shallow breaths. His face was still too pale, his body weak, but there was warmth in his skin now, something that had been missing for far too long. The doctors had worked fast once Andrew had gotten the autopsy results. He hadn't stopped fighting, not until they had agreed to attempt resuscitation measures, not until they had listened to him. It had been a miracle. A whisper of a pulse. A flicker of life. Lucas had been buried alive, left to suffocate under the weight of dirt and betrayal. But somehow, against every odd, he had held on just long enough. Andrew swallowed, blinking rapidly to fight the burning behind his eyes. He had failed his son in every way imaginable. But this was his second chance. "Dad?" The voice was hoarse, barely audible, but it sent a bolt of relief through Andrew's chest. His throat tightened. "I'm here, buddy." Lucas blinked up at him, his expression hazy with confusion. "Where?" "You're safe," Andrew said quickly, leaning closer. "You're in the hospital, but you're safe." Lucas's brows knitted together as if he were trying to piece things together. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I thought I was gone." Andrew exhaled shakily. "You almost were," he admitted, his voice thick. "But not anymore. I've got you." Lucas's lips parted, his breathing shallow. "Layla?" "She's fine," Andrew reassured him. "She's been waiting for you to wake up." Lucas's gaze flickered toward the doorway. As if on cue, Layla appeared, her eyes wide, glassy with unshed tears. "Lucas!" She ran to his bedside, grasping his other hand, her fingers shaking. Lucas offered a weak smile. "Hey, Lay." Her face crumpled, but she didn't cry. She just squeezed his hand, holding on like she was afraid to let go. Mark lingered behind her, hesitant, as if unsure of his place in this moment. Lucas's gaze drifted to him, and after a long pause, he nodded slightly. "Thanks," he murmured. Mark ducked his head. "I didn't do anything." "Yeah, you did," Lucas said softly. "You believed her first." Andrew swallowed hard, unable to look away from the scene before him. His children had saved each other in ways he hadn't, and he would never make the mistake of looking away again. The police found Grace before she could flee the state. She had been careful. She always was, but she hadn't accounted for Andrew no longer being blind to her deception. She was arrested at a small rental house just outside the city, her packed bags still sitting by the door. When they placed the cuffs on her wrists, she didn't struggle. Instead, she smiled. At the police station, Andrew sat across from her, the weight of everything she had done pressing against his ribs. He had thought he would be angrier, that he would want to scream at her, to demand why. But as she sat there, perfectly composed, her eyes sharp but unreadable, he realized he didn't need to, because Grace didn't regret anything. "You really think this changes things?" she asked, tilting her head. Andrew clenched his jaw. "I know it does." She exhaled, shaking her head with mock pity. "You were so easy to control," she mused. "So desperate for someone to take care of things for you. And I did, didn't I?" His stomach turned. Grace leaned forward slightly. "You can play the grieving father all you want, but we both know the truth. You let me in. You let me handle everything. And now you need me to be the villain, because it's easier than admitting you failed him." Andrew met her gaze, steady and unwavering. "I did fail him," he admitted, "but I won't fail him again." For the first time, something flickered across her face, something like frustration. "You don't get to win, Andrew." He stood. "I already have." Grace's smile faltered as he walked out of the room without looking back. Lucas was discharged from the hospital a week later. His recovery would take time, but Andrew was ready to be there for every step of it. They drove home in silence, the weight of everything still settling. But there was something different in the air now, something lighter. Layla and Mark sat in the back seat, their heads leaning against each other as exhaustion pulled them into sleep. Lucas sat in the passenger seat, his fingers absently drumming against his knee. Andrew glanced at him. "You okay?" Lucas was quiet for a long moment. Then he exhaled. "Yeah," he said, "I think I will be." And for the first time in a long time, Andrew believed him. The house no longer felt like a place haunted by shadows. It had been weeks since Lucas had come home from the hospital, and though his body was still weak, his spirit was healing. The once sterile silence in the house was now replaced with warmth, soft chatter over breakfast, laughter echoing through the halls, the gentle hum of life returning. Andrew stood in the kitchen, watching as Lucas sat at the table, scribbling in a notebook. Layla sat beside him, legs swinging under the chair, her face buried in a book. Across from them, Mark hesitated with his pencil, deep in thought. It was an image that had once seemed impossible. Andrew had spent too long watching from a distance, believing that providing for his children was enough. But now, he was here. Really here. Lucas looked up, meeting Andrew's gaze. "What?" he asked, a small smirk playing on his lips. Andrew shook his head. "Nothing," he murmured, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Just happy to see you guys like this." Lucas rolled his eyes but smiled. "That's new." Layla giggled, nudging Mark, who only gave a small, hesitant smile in return. Andrew sat down, leaning forward, his fingers tapping the edge of his mug. "I was thinking," he said, his voice careful, steady, "about something important." The kids looked up. Mark stiffened, as if expecting bad news. Andrew glanced at him. "Mark, I want to adopt you." Mark's head snapped up, his eyes widening. His fingers gripped his pencil, as if he couldn't process the words. "Well, what?" "I know I can't change the past," Andrew said gently. "And I know things haven't been easy for you. But you're part of this family now. You always have been." Mark swallowed hard, staring at him like he was waiting for the catch. "You really mean that?" Andrew nodded. "I do." Mark's lower lip trembled. He ducked his head, his hands gripping the edges of his notebook. A long silence stretched between them before he whispered, "I never thought I'd get to have a real family." Layla reached over, placing her small hand over his. "You already do." Lucas, quiet as ever, gave a firm nod. "Yeah, you're stuck with us now." Mark let out a shaky breath, then finally, he smiled. A real one. Andrew's chest tightened as he reached over, placing a hand on Mark's shoulder. "From now on, you'll never have to be afraid again." The boy's shoulders relaxed. He nodded, his eyes wet with unshed tears. "Okay." A new beginning. That evening, Andrew stood outside on the porch, the cool breeze rustling through the trees. He looked up at the sky, watching the stars blink above him. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. He had spent so long drowning in grief, too lost in his own pain to see what was happening right in front of him. He had almost lost everything, but he had been given a second chance. He wouldn't waste it. The door creaked open behind him. Lucas stepped outside, leaning against the railing. Couldn't sleep? Andrew chuckled softly. Getting used to having a full house again. Lucas smirked. Yeah, it's kind of nice though. Andrew studied his son, the boy who had fought his way back from the edge, the boy he had almost lost because he wasn't paying attention. I love you, you know, Andrew said, his voice quiet but certain. Lucas's smirk faded. He looked down, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah, he murmured. I know. Andrew exhaled, resting a hand on Lucas's shoulder. I'm going to do better, kid. I swear Lucas tilted his head, considering him. Then, slowly, he nodded. I know that too. They stood there for a while, the night stretching around them, the past slowly letting go. For the first time in a long time, the house was whole, a home, a family, and this time, Andrew wouldn't take it for granted. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. And if you enjoyed this story, please share it with your friends on WhatsApp. And now, share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.